This is Frank Islam, Chairman and CEO of FI Investment Group and your host of Washington Calling, where we interview leading voices from business and politics that impact you, the viewer. Today, we are fortunate to have a distinguished guest, and her name is Ambassador Mukherjee, a retired Indian diplomat who's now a popular commentator on Indian television. She was Ambassador of India to Netherlands and the permanent delegate of India to UNESCO. She comments on several issues such as foreign policy, disarmament, and cultural heritage. Thank you, Madam Ambassador, for coming to our show, and welcome to our show.
Thank you very much. And it's a pleasure to be here talking to you. I have, in fact, reinvented myself after my superannuation, as we call it in the Foreign Service. And I'm also a best-selling author of 3 books, the latest one of which is The Partition of the Eastern Part of India. It's called The Partition of Bengal. And it's trending pretty well because it's actually an untold story, an untold narrative. I've also written a very popular book on the complicated relationship between India and the European Union.
And I want to talk about that book in my fourth questions that I have. And by the way, you were ambassador to Holland. My wife's ancestors came from Holland.
Right. That's nice.
And as a matter of fact, 100 years ago. So, Ambassador Mukherjee, you have been Indian diplomat for almost 4 decades. How would you describe the evolution of India's foreign policy? And I want you to give us a timeline following independence. India's outlook was shaped by Prime Minister Nehru, which was built on the non-alignment international arena. The world will begin to evolve following the collapse of the Soviet Union. And now India has opened its economy. Now India is showcasing a willingness to take more responsibilities internationally. And tell us a little bit what happened after that in post 9/11 in terms of climate change, the rise of China. So how much India's policy have evolved? Give us a little bit of timeline, Ambassador.
Well, first of all, I would like to say that there is a continuity in our foreign policy because foreign policy of a country serves its national interest. So the policy that we had immediately after independence under our first Prime Minister Nehru served our interests because the world was going through the Cold War and India did not want to be dragged into any camps. And therefore, the policy of non-alignment, which was not a policy of weakness, but of protecting ourselves from being dragged into 2 different camps who wanted to destroy each other, was for India the best possible policy at that point of time. Then came the end of the Cold War and the world changed. And India too, with its foreign policy, had to move with it. So when former implacable enemies became friends, alliances changed. India too opened up its economy and looked at itself and realized that its foreign policy too had to move with the times. Hence, from a policy of non-alignment, we moved to a policy of strategic alignment, strategic autonomy, seeking friends and alliances where we could, given the fact that we unfortunately, like the Israelis, for example, live in a hostile neighborhood with implacable enemies on our east and our west. Under those circumstances, and given that one implacable enemy is becoming more implacable by the day, we have therefore moved a considerable degree westwards. And today, our closest strategic partner is United States. So non-alignment has been moved 180 degrees to resolve our national interests because we find in these strategic partnerships with the United States, the combination of hard and soft power required to secure India's interests in this hostile neighborhood. And
very well said. I like your answer. So I want to kind of move to the, you have been very instrumental in enhancing India-Europe engagements. Now we have growing threat perception from China. You mentioned that. So my question is, how closely are the Indian and EU policies aligned? And also I want you to shed some bright lights on free trade and also the political relationship, economic and commercial relationship, bilateral agreements, people-to-people relationship. What do you think the India and EU have in common besides democracy, human rights, and freedom of press? What else do they have in common?
Well, it's a very timely question because,
Okay.
because our Prime Minister has just met yesterday with
Yeah.
the EU leadership.
Yes.
We have also signed an India-EU Connectivity Pact in May this year. We have annual India-EU summits since June 2000. I went for the first one to Lisbon in June 2000. But more than that, the EU on its part, post-Brexit, that's very important development post-Brexit, they have just announced on 16th of September the Indo-Pacific, EU Indo-Pacific strategy. And ironically, it was announced one day after AUKUS. Now, in these two developments, India is closely interlinked because AUKUS includes United States and Australia, with whom we are in quad with Japan.
Mhm.
And the Indo-Pacific strategy of the European Union means that some EU countries, and that includes Germany, have finally understood that if they just put commercial interests ahead of their own strategic interests, they would be in a problem one day or the other. This is what India had been urging them, that it is all right that they have a great business relationship with China, for instance, the German automobile industry. But given the fact that the Chinese are becoming more and more aggressive in the South China Sea, in the Indo-Pacific, it is not possible for this huge and powerful bloc to just go the economic way and ignore what is happening in a very important part of the world, where actually are most of the trade lines of the European Union. Where do they do the trade from? They do it right there in the Indo-Pacific. Where do they have their most important strategic partners? Japan and India in the Indo-Pacific. With whom have they signed a connectivity pact? With Japan 2 years ago and with India in May 21. And let me tell you, since you talked about the FTA would have been signed way back in 2008. The European Union lost a golden opportunity, and so did India, because if you recall, it was the time of the meltdown, it was the time of the bank crisis, and the EU, which had already ironed out all the difficult parts of the pact with us, felt that they were not in a position, and that is their sovereign decision, to make those concessions at a time when they were almost going into a bank meltdown. So several years passed, and when they came back to us, we were no longer in a position either to make those concessions because things had changed in India. Lobbies had become more powerful, lobbies which we could have coerced into giving some concessions 10 years ago, etc. Things changed. We are now in a situation where we have suggested to the European Union that we should have a smaller trade pact on areas that we agree with, rather than the very ambitious agreement that they want to have with us, and which they have not been able to have so far with any developing country except Vietnam. I think that this pact, when it will come through, it will go through much faster on the investment side, because on investment, there are fewer areas of disagreement, but it will have to take time on the trade side because there are lobbies on both sides. It's not just on one side, which is where don't want to give concessions. And also, there is a body of opinion within India.
So you see a brighter horizon in terms of the.
No, there is a body of
trade
opinion. There's a body of opinion within India that also feel that right now the Indian economy will not benefit from deep penetrating FTAs. So
Okay.
that's the point I wanted to make. Thank you.
And what's SDA stands for, Ambassador Mukherjee?
FTA is a free trade agreement.
Oh,
But
free
what
trade agreement. Yeah,
but
yeah,
what the EU wants is a BTIA,
yeah,
which
yeah.
means the Bilateral Trade and Investment Agreement, BTIA.
Very well said.
All
Now,
jargon.
you have and continue to embrace the richness of India's culture and heritage because of a diversity, which I believe brings people together and is a strength. So my question to you, Ambassador, is how can India contribute to better global understanding, considering India's rich history and heritage and culture and vibrant democracy and vibrant society? Can you shed some bright lights? Do you believe that diversity is a strength or the barrier for India's development? And do you believe that diversity brings the people together?
We are a diverse nation. That is
We
our
are.
strength. That is exactly why we are so different from the Chinese. When you look at China, it's a Han Chinese nation which
Yeah.
doesn't understand what minorities are. We, on the other hand, our culture and civilization, which also goes back very long time like China's, is a tapestry of different cultures. And nothing could be more symbolic than the meeting today of Prime Minister Modi with the Pope at the Vatican. They met. The meeting went on much longer than expected. Prime Minister has invited the Pope, who is a very iconic figure himself, to visit us.
The
We
Pope, you're talking about
understand
Pope Francis to come to India.
Pope Francis will be visiting us. He's done so much for alleviating poverty when he was in Argentina. Uh, Prime Minister himself also has a humble origin and has done so much for development. These two, when they met, it was a wonderful meeting, but it showcases that, for instance, in India, we have a, a Roman Catholic community. It is robust. We have a Muslim community, which is huge, 160 million. And we have Jews. We've got, in fact, we have one of some of the oldest synagogues in the world,
Mhm.
which is
Sure
in
do.
Kerala.
Yes.
And we have lived with all religions, Buddhism, Jainism, Hinduism, Christianity, Islam for a very long time. So
For
what more
thousands
can
of
we say about
years.
diversity? Yes.
For thousands of years.
That is why it is important for others who have problems in handling minorities to come to India and see how India handles its minorities.
Very well
And
said.
that democracy is the only way to robust way to protect minority rights.
And to protect everyone, just not the minority, to make sure their voices, to make sure their voices are heard, to make sure they're part of the India's fabric in terms of political, social, and economic fabric. I want to talk a little bit about the common thing that we have between the United States and India is just not the democracy, and we want to, but the diversity. Both countries has a very diverse workforce and diverse people, and that brings the people together. And I do believe very strongly the diversity is a strength, and
Absolutely.
because it does bring the people together. And democracy is a strength also. And I want India to be a global beacon of hope for democracy around the globe. I wanted to talk about global geopolitics, as you know, is in flux, especially in South Asia and Indo-Pacific region. How do you think India's foreign policy is shaping up to the challenges? And what are the goals and objectives of the India's foreign policy in the Indo-Pacific region? And
Well,
and the Asia.
we have already, with the Quad, spelled out what we want from the Indo-Pacific, which is an open, transparent, rule-based order, and this is what we desire. The fact that the Quad had to spell it out so clearly, and it was followed by the EU spelling out a formula which is almost identical to the Quad on 16 September, means that major powers, and that includes India, which is right there in the Indo-Pacific region, are concerned by certain negative tendencies, which, unless checked, might cast a long shadow on international peace and security and the Western order, which has developed after the World War II. So India's foreign policy is geared towards ensuring that along with other alliances and partners, we are committed to ensuring that rule-based order. And we are aware of the fact that we cannot do it alone. So we do need like-minded countries, and that is where the Quad and United States come in. They are very important to us, like the European Union. Again, a very, very important strategic partner which understands India's priorities and recognizes that those priorities are identical to Western priorities.
I
There
want
is
to I want to talk about your book, and I think you mentioned that at the opening when we on the partition of Bengal.
yes.
What do you think the lessons have learned for India and South Asia from Bengal's partition? Do you have a personal observation on the book that you wrote called Bengal and its partition? And do you have any reason for that we should have avoided the Bengal partition, especially the colonial rule of Great Britain in India that was basically, based on the principle of divide and rule? And in that, if you recall, it was the Battle of Presley. I think Plessy is the correct pronunciation that sowed the seeds of the partition of Bengal. Do you believe that?
This is a book
Yeah.
called Bengal.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you very much. Can you
I,
show it one more time to the audience so audience will know? And is it available in Amazon? Very
yes,
well.
got 5 stars on Amazon, which I'm told is very good. I'm not very familiar with these things, but the book was written because my parents come from Dhaka, Bikrampur, Bengal, and I was always concerned that when one talked about partition in India, there was an excessive emphasis on what happened in the Punjab and hardly any discussion on the tragedy of the East. Now, the Battle of Plassey, I completely agree with you. My book starts with Plassey, and
Yeah, it does.
the chapter is called When Bengal Was Sold to the British in 1757. It was sold. The British purchased Bengal and thereafter purchased the rest of India for 180 years. And what did they do? In Bengal, you had a narrative based on a syncretic culture. You had Hindus and Muslims who lived together, worshipped together, had songs, culture, poetry, which was based on each other's religious traditions. It was amazing, where you had Sufism, which had its deep roots along with Shaivism and the Bhakti movement in Bengal.
Very
And then
well.
came the British, and they sowed those poison grapes of communalism, and they told the Muslims that how ever could Muslims be safe in Bengal when they leave, because if the Hindus take over, they would not be safe. And they told the Hindus that these Muslims, they are less educated than you. They will have, there are areas where there are more numerous. So where there will be a majority, they're going to just massacre all of you. You guys are not fit to live together. Be reasonable, separate the land. And how did they separate it? They did not even separate it on the basis of majority minority, because it was intermingled. People were living together for centuries. So they brought this man who had no experience about India or partition, but he was a good friend of Mountbatten. And he divided the country arbitrarily according to political pressures being put on him at particular points of time. So you had areas of Bengal which were Buddhist, like the Chittagong Hill Tract,
Right.
which went to East Pakistan, etc. So yes, I wrote this book because I feel strongly that partition was brought to India and to India's east, which as a violation of the most sacred principles of syncretism under which my ancestors were brought up in, and that both Hindus and Muslims were made to unfollow a narrative that was false and wrong. And today, if you look at the attacks on Hindus in Bangladesh, it merely demonstrates that those poison grapes sowed by the British have not yet been fully harvested. They are still being harvested, and that's why you have the right.
Obviously, it's deeply rooted in your in your heritage because you belong to that part of the world. You understand it. And let me talk to you a little bit about the evolution of Indo-US engagement. You mentioned about the Indo-US relationship and the implication for the region post the Quad and the AUKUS, which is the Australia, UK, United States alliance. Do you think the AUKUS will affect or not affect India-US relations negatively or positively? Can you shed some bright light on these things? And I want to talk about, is Quad good for India or not?
We are very comfortable with AUKUS because it's a military grouping, which Quad is not a fully military grouping.
It's a security.
It's a security grouping, and it is intended to ensure the same interest that we have, which is a transparent rule-based order in the Indo-Pacific. It is always complex when a military grouping includes United Kingdom in this part of the world, because the United Kingdom is a former colonial power, and therefore when it gets into the Indo-Pacific, it brings with it baggage which US doesn't have, Australia doesn't have. Therefore,
well, the both were a colony of Great Britain, Australia as well as the United States. Still, the George Washington got independence for us.
That old historical colonial baggage always has a certain knee-jerk reaction. Moreover, it is not yet clear how long it will be before those nuclear submarines, large ones, are given to Australia. But whatever it is a good development. We welcome it. We are also Quad members with Australia, and we have the warmest bilateral relationship with France, and therefore we have fully supported France in its hurt feelings about the way it was they were treated about
the Biden apologized to
yes,
he did.
That was gracious of him, very gracious of him. He did that, yes. So we don't have as far as Quad is concerned, you wanted to ask me about Quad?
Yeah, I wanted to say what the future of the Quads will be. It seems to me the Quad will have is a non-military. You know, it takes the security military less, you know, the issues off the table. But AUKUS is a military alliance between the United States, Australia, and United Kingdom, but Quad is not.
For the moment, you have to.
Well, that's what we're saying.
Have to understand that these are
but India doesn't have any interest, obviously, in types of military alliance with the United States.
Well, that is not something that I can pronounce myself on. If you had asked me when I joined the Foreign Service in 1976 whether India would ever have a strategic partnership with the United States, I would tell you that is impossible, right? So as things change, as the world order moves, or it combats new challenges, including from China, it is quite normal for India to change too. It is true that for the moment, the Quad is not a military alliance, but it has very important partners who are anchored in a military partnership. And you have to also consider that in a situation where NATO has got Turkey as a member, and Turkey has turned hostile, the United States and other NATO countries need to have new formations which would better secure their interests. And where better in the Indo-Pacific than with the Quad and with AUKUS. Also, it reflects that the UN Security Council today doesn't really reflect the new power balance, because where is Australia, where is Japan, and where is India in the Security Council? It is not. We are a non-permanent member at the moment for 2 years, and we will move out. So in a situation where the Security Council cannot be reformed, these new alliances demonstrate that outside the UN, you are having strategic formations which would counter certain adverse developments. And where India would be, let's say 10 years from now, is it a military alliance or not with the United States? I really cannot tell you now, because
nobody knows.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much, Ambassador Mukherjee, for your time, and thank you for being here. This is Frank Islam wishing you a great week, and thank you for watching.